From the old Cincinnati Library to the Chicago Federal Building, countless historical landmarks throughout the United States have been demolished to make room for parking garages, office buildings, and more modern structures. Join us as we take a look at a few of the landmarks destroyed in the name of progress. Viewcation presents American Landmarks That Have Been Destroyed. Garrick Theater. Many of Louis Sullivan's Chicago buildings have been preserved, but we did lose one of his most fetching designs. The renowned architect built Garrick Theater with Dankmar Adler in 1891. Today, a parking garage sits where the enchanting theater once stood. Sullivan's beautiful creation was torn down in 1961, but before it was gone, photographer Richard Nickel was able to document the space, so at least we can see what it was like in its heyday. With intricately carved arches and beautiful marble work, it's a wonder why the Windy City didn't try harder to save it from the chopping block. The original Penn Station. When discussing destroyed landmarks, New York's Penn Station is usually one of the first leveled structures to come to mind. Today, Penn Station is housed below Madison Square Garden in Midtown and serves more than 500,000 passengers daily. But before it was moved underground in the 60s, Penn Station was a gorgeous Beaux Arts fortress considered to be one of the Big Apple's crown jewels. Featuring 22 eagle sculptures, 84 enormous Doric columns, and a 138-foot-high ceiling, the original Penn Station was an architectural wonder. By the mid-20th century, however, passenger volume had begun to decline sharply, and the building's maintenance became increasingly expensive. Because of this, the Pennsylvania Railroad Company eventually made the difficult decision to demolish the main headhouse and train shed while keeping the tracks underground in service. In 1961, plans to build Madison Square Garden on top of Penn Station were unveiled, but the plan quickly faced public outcry. The renowned art historian Vincent Scully once summed up the controversy by calling the old structure, quote, one that entered the city like a god, and the new one as one that, quote, scuttles in like a rat. Despite these concerns, the original Penn Station was demolished in 1963, and Madison Square Garden opened half a decade later. Mark Hopkins Mansion. Railroad magnate Mark Hopkins unfortunately never got to see the mansion that he commissioned a duo of architects to build for him and his beloved wife high atop San Francisco's Nob Hill. Shortly before the mansion's completion in 1878, Hopkins passed away. Even more sad is the fact that we'll never get to see the mansion either, as the opulent Victorian home burned to the ground following the devastating 1906 San Francisco earthquake. Mark's widow Mary did, however, get a chance to appreciate the decadently majestic home for a spell. She lived there for several years before marrying one of the interior designers she hired to furnish the place. Old Cincinnati Library. For about 8 decades, the old Cincinnati Public Library in Cincinnati, Ohio, looked like something straight out of an old movie. It featured towering bookshelves packed full of boundless knowledge, lavish marble floors, spiraling staircases, and enormous skylights. The building, located on Vine Street in the heart of downtown, housed one of the most impressively beautiful libraries in the country, and perhaps the world. The old library opened its doors in 1874, and its stunning interior was designed by the famed J.W. McLaughlin. Initially, the building was meant to be used as an opera house, but it was converted into a library after the original project lost its funding. During the library's grand opening, the local paper, the Cincinnati Enquirer, praised its unique structure, saying they were impressed not only by its magnitude and beauty, but also by its adaptation to the purpose it served. By the 1920s, however, the library was quickly running out of room to house all of its books. Then in 1955, a new main library was opened right down the street. As such, the once celebrated building was demolished, and today a drab parking garage sits in its place. The Chicago Federal Building. Chicago's Federal Building was once a place of grandiose proportions, featuring a rotunda larger than the one in the Washington, D.C. Capitol Building. During its day, it was considered to be a Beaux Arts masterpiece. The building stood for 6 decades after being completed in 1905 before being demolished in 1965. It was later replaced by Miles Van der Rohe's comparatively prosaic modernist Kluzinski Federal Building. Beacon Towers. While we can't say for certain, it's believed by some that this fabulous Gilded Age mansion on Long Island was the inspiration for F. Scott Fitzgerald's classic novel, The Great Gatsby. The Beacon Towers was a Gothic Gold Coast landmark from 1917 to 1945. The house was lived in by Alva Belmont, the widow of Oliver Belmont and an ex-Vanderbilt, and William Randolph Hearst. The Cliff House. While the Cliff House of San Francisco still exists, it does so only in name. The latest incarnation is a dramatic, stylistic departure from the original 7-story chateau that sat there from 1896 to 1907 when it burned to rubble. The landmark was later rebuilt and received a series of makeovers, but the majestic home that once stood atop the rocky coastal terrain exists only in pictures. The Beach Hotel. This Galveston, Texas landmark was one of many grandiloquent hotels that once occupied the area affectionately known as the Playground of the Southwest. While it had its fair share of competition, the Beach Hotel was arguably the prettiest. This red and white striped Victorian-style structure was constructed in 1882. It was designed by Nicholas Clayton, who also designed Galveston's treasured Bishop's Palace. Sadly, it only stood for a few years before being demolished following a mysterious fire that resulted in significant structural damage. Marlborough-Blenheim Hotel. In 1902, Josiah White III started building a Queen Anne-style hotel in New Jersey's Atlantic City, which he called the Marlborough. Not long after initial construction had been completed, White decided to expand the resort. With the help of architect Will Price, he designed a separate tower named after Winston Churchill's birthplace in Blenheim, England. At the time, the Blenheim Tower was the largest reinforced concrete building on the planet. It featured Moorish and Spanish themes and a giant glistening dome. The two buildings that White had commissioned ended up forming what was known as the Marlborough-Blenheim Hotel, and they were considered to be a staple of Atlantic City for years. Churchill himself even made a point to stay there in 1916. After changing hands, the hotel was eventually demolished in October of 1978. Bally's Park Place Casino now stands at the hotel's former location. Richfield Tower. The Richfield Tower in Los Angeles was completed in 1929. Also known as the Richfield Oil Company building, the structure was designed by Styles O. Clements and boasted a bold gold and black Art Deco facade. This design made it stand out amongst all the buildings that surrounded it at the time. The black and gold color scheme was meant to symbolize the black gold nickname for oil. Additionally, the 130 feet tall beacon at the top of the building was meant to be reminiscent of an oil derrick. Including this beacon, the Richfield Tower stood at 372 feet high and was adorned with the name Richfield on its side. By the 1960s, the Richfield Oil Company had effectively outgrown the tower, leading to its demolition in 1969. In its place was built the Arco Plaza skyscraper complex, which has since been renamed City National Plaza. Keith's New Theater. Producer Benjamin F. Keith had this theater built on Philadelphia's Chestnut Street in 1901. The stunning building hosted vaudeville shows and featured iconic columns, a triumphal arch, and a striking recessed entrance. It quickly became a popular destination where stars like Charlie Chaplin and the Marx Brothers would regularly perform. But as vaudeville began to die out, the theater struggled to maintain attendance. In 1943, William Goldman purchased the building and converted it into a movie theater, renaming it the Randolph Theater after his deceased son. In 1971, the theater was permanently closed and the building was demolished. Today, of course, the site is home to several office buildings and retail stores. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you know about any of these old buildings? Let us know in the comments section below.